Let's deep dive into a mind-blowing YouTube podcast created by artificial intelligence, where you will hear conversations by two AI agents in a way you've never imagined before. This isn't just a podcast, it's a journey into the future, crafted by AI, designed for you. Ready to have your mind blown? Let's begin.
Welcome to another deep dive with us. We are going to be cracking open Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Oh, a classic.
Yeah.
It's a great one.
I'm so excited to really get into like how our minds work, you know,
Yeah.
the good, the bad, and the just plain bizarre.
Yeah, it's a fascinating look at how we make decisions.
Right, yeah.
And, the core idea is that our brains use two systems.
Okay.
One that's fast and intuitive, that's system one.
Okay.
And then another that's slower and more deliberate, system two.
So it's like we've got a super speedy race car driver in our head,
Yeah.
and then we've got like a meticulous detective living up there too.
You love that analogy.
But like, how does this play out in our everyday life?
Yeah, so system one is at work when you, say, instantly recognize someone's mood
Okay.
or swerve to avoid an obstacle while driving.
Oh, okay.
It's driven by instinct and emotion.
Okay.
Essential for survival, but not always accurate.
Well, that explains why I sometimes jump to conclusions before I think things through. And I feel like Kahneman uses that example with like the Moses Ark, right?
Yeah. Most people will quickly answer two
Right.
to the question of how many animals of each kind did Moses take on the ark,
Oh, right.
without realizing that it should be Noah's Ark.
Right. Not Moses.
Not Moses, yeah. So it shows how system one relies on these mental shortcuts, what he calls heuristics,
Okay.
which can lead to these biases.
So even though it's fast, system one can totally like lead us astray sometimes.
Yeah.
So where does system two come in?
System two is that inner detective,
Yeah.
carefully analyzing information, weighing options, like if you're tackling a complex math problem
Okay.
or planning a trip,
Mm-hmm.
but it requires effort. And our brains, as Kahneman puts it, are cognitive misers.
So we prefer the ease of system one, even if it means making mistakes.
Yeah, it's all about efficiency.
Okay.
But the problem is this reliance on system one makes us prone to all sorts of cognitive biases,
Okay.
which are these fascinating quirks in our thinking that can trip us up.
Okay, let's get into these biases.
Okay.
I'm ready to hear all the ways our brains can fool us.
Right.
Where do we even begin? I mean, there's just so many in the book.
One that can have a huge impact on our choices is anchoring bias.
Okay.
And this is where even irrelevant information can influence our judgments.
Okay.
So in one experiment,
Mm-hmm.
people who spun a wheel that landed on a higher number estimated the length of the Mississippi River to be longer
Okay.
than those who spun a lower number.
That's wild. Just seeing that random number somehow anchored their perception.
Yeah.
How does that, like, play out in, like, real-world decisions?
So imagine you're negotiating a salary.
Okay.
The first number that's thrown out, even if it's completely arbitrary,
Yeah.
can become an anchor.
Okay.
And it influences the rest of the negotiation.
So it's like buying a car or a house.
Exactly.
That initial price sets the stage for the rest of the negotiation.
Yeah.
So being aware of this bias is crucial.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we might end up overpaying or like undervaluing something based on like an irrelevant anchor. And this is just one example.
Yeah, another fascinating bias is the availability heuristic.
Okay.
And this one explains why we tend to overestimate the likelihood of events that are easily recalled, often due to vivid media coverage.
Like shark attacks and plane crashes.
Exactly. Those stories, they're so dramatic, they stick in our minds.
They do.
Even though the odds are incredibly low.
Right.
So the availability heuristic highlights how our perceptions are often shaped by what's easily accessible in our memory,
Okay.
rather than the actual probabilities.
So we need to be critical of what we see and hear, especially like from the news.
Yeah.
Just because something is highly publicized doesn't mean it's actually a common threat.
Exactly.
Now, remember that example from the book about the quiet, bookish individual?
Yeah.
People often assume they're more likely to be a librarian than a farmer,
Right.
even though statistically there are far more farmers out there.
Exactly. And that's the representativeness bias, where we
Right.
rely on stereotypes. And we ignore what are called base rates, the actual probabilities of something being true.
Okay.
We see a few traits, and we jump to conclusions
Right.
based on what seems representative of a category,
Right.
without considering the bigger picture.
Gotcha.
And this can lead to all sorts of misjudgments, especially about people.
So it's like our brains are constantly trying to like look for patterns and categorize things to make sense of the world, even if those patterns are totally misleading.
Exactly.
But it's not always a bad thing, right?
Right.
Because System 1, it does have its strengths.
Yeah.
It keeps us safe in dangerous situations, allows us to make quick decisions when needed.
It's all about finding that balance,
Right.
recognizing when to trust our gut and
Yeah.
when to engage that inner detective system too.
Totally.
It's all about understanding these biases.
Yeah.
It's the first step towards striking that balance
Okay.
and making more informed decisions.
So we've dipped our toes into the world of System 1 and System 2 and explored a few of those fascinating cognitive biases.
We have.
But I'm ready to go deeper.
All right.
Let's talk about like some of the bigger ones, like loss aversion.
Okay.
That can really, really impact our choices.
All right, let's do it. So loss aversion.
Okay.
It's a powerful one.
Okay.
It explains why the pain of losing something
Mhm.
often feels much stronger
Okay.
than the pleasure of gaining something
Okay.
of equal value.
It's like that feeling of dread when you realize you've lost like $20.
Yeah.
It just like overshadows the joy you might feel finding $20 on the street.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Kahneman found that losses have about twice
Really?
the psychological impact of gains.
Wow.
And this can lead to some interesting choices, particularly when it comes to risk.
Okay, give us a real-world example of like how this plays out.
So let's say you have an opportunity to invest in a new venture.
Okay.
There's a 50% chance you'll double your money,
Mm-hmm.
50% chance you'll lose half of your initial investment. Logically, the potential reward outweighs the risk.
Right.
But a lot of people would shy away
Okay.
because of loss aversion.
That makes sense because the fear of like losing that money would feel more intense
Yeah.
than the potential excitement of like doubling it.
Yeah, loss aversion can make us overly cautious, even when taking a calculated risk
Right.
might be beneficial in the long run.
So how do we overcome this like innate fear of loss and make more rational decisions?
Awareness is key.
Okay.
Recognizing that we're all susceptible to it
Mm-hmm.
can help us step back and evaluate situations
Right.
more objectively.
Okay, so sometimes it's worth taking a calculated risk,
Yeah,
even if there's potential for loss.
exactly.
We need to train our brains to look at the bigger picture
Yeah.
instead of getting fixated on that potential loss.
Yeah.
Speaking of overvaluing things, what about the endowment effect?
Oh, the endowment effect.
I remember that being a strange one.
It's fascinating. It shows how we tend to overvalue something simply because we own it.
Okay, so Kahneman did a study. Participants were given a coffee mug.
Okay.
Those who received the mug
Mhm.
were willing to sell it
Okay.
for a much higher price
Right.
than those who didn't own one were willing to pay for it.
So just the act of possessing something makes us think it's worth more.
Yeah.
I can see how that would make it hard to let go of things,
Yeah,
even if they no longer serve us.
absolutely.
The endowment effect can lead us to cling to possessions,
Yeah.
overprice items when selling, or hold on to investments too long,
Yeah.
even when logic says, hey,
Yeah.
maybe it's time to sell.
Exactly.
So how do we avoid falling prey to the endowment effect?
Awareness, again, is crucial.
Okay.
When selling something, try to detach yourself emotionally.
Okay.
Focus on its actual market value.
Gotcha.
When considering a purchase, ask yourself if you would pay that price
Right.
if you didn't already own it.
That's a great tip.
Yeah.
It helps remove that emotional attachment
Yeah.
and allows for a more objective assessment.
Now, what about prospect theory?
Okay.
That one seemed really complex.
Yeah, prospect theory really dives into how we perceive and evaluate potential gains and losses.
Right.
And it highlights this power of framing.
Okay.
That the same information presented in different ways
Mhm.
can lead to different choices,
Oh.
even if the underlying facts
Wow.
are identical.
Okay, I need an example.
Okay.
How does framing actually change our decisions?
So imagine you're told a medical treatment has a 90% survival rate.
Okay, yeah, that sounds pretty promising.
Right.
Yeah.
But what if you're told that treatment has a 10% mortality rate?
It suddenly feels much riskier.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's the same information,
Wow.
just framed differently,
Yeah,
yet it evokes different emotions
right.
and influences our perception of risk.
That's crazy. So the way something is presented can completely change how we feel about it
Yeah.
and ultimately influence our choices.
Yeah. Exactly. Prospect theory shows that we're more sensitive to potential losses
Okay,
than we are to equivalent gains.
gotcha.
So a positive frame emphasizing gains,
Mm-hmm.
can make us more risk-averse.
Okay.
But a negative frame,
Okay.
highlighting potential losses,
Mm-hmm.
can make us more willing to take risks.
This is really making me rethink how I approach information and decision-making.
Yeah,
I'm starting to see these biases everywhere.
they're everywhere.
What other fascinating biases can really trip us up?
Well, in today's competitive world,
Mm-hmm.
overconfidence bias is a big one.
Okay.
We often overestimate our abilities and our knowledge,
Right.
leading to poor decisions.
Oh, yeah, that's the one where everyone thinks they're like an above-average driver. Statistically, that can't be true.
But this overconfidence goes beyond these trivial matters.
Okay.
You know, it can influence CEOs
Mm-hmm.
making risky business decisions
Oh.
or investors pouring money into ventures that ultimately fail. Overconfidence often leads to us underestimating risks,
Mm-hmm.
overestimating our control, particularly in uncertain situations.
So it seems like a healthy dose of humility
Yeah,
could be a good antidote to overconfidence.
I like that.
Maybe we should all question our assumptions a bit more.
That's a valuable insight.
Yeah.
Recognizing our own limitations
Mhm.
and being open to different viewpoints
Right.
can help us make more grounded decisions.
Absolutely.
And speaking of perspectives,
Yeah.
let's talk about the halo effect.
Okay, the halo effect.
Yeah.
Now that one sounds interesting.
It is.
Fill us in.
The halo effect is our tendency to judge someone's overall character
Okay.
based on a single positive trait.
Okay.
For instance, if someone is attractive,
Mm-hmm.
we might also assume they're intelligent,
Right.
kind, and trustworthy,
Okay.
even though these qualities are unrelated to
Yeah.
their looks.
So one positive characteristic creates this halo that makes us view everything about them more favorably.
Exactly.
Got it.
And this bias can have a big impact on everything from our social interactions
Right.
to hiring decisions.
Okay.
Kahneman points to studies where teachers rated students who were well-dressed as more intelligent,
Really?
even though clothing has no correlation with academic ability.
That's incredibly eye-opening.
It is.
It seems like we need to be very careful about letting first impressions and these superficial qualities cloud our judgment.
Absolutely.
The halo effect highlights the importance of looking beyond superficial traits
Yeah.
and gathering more information
Yeah.
before forming judgments.
Yeah. And this ties into another concept from the book, right?
Oh, right.
WYSIAD.
WYSIAD.
What you see is all there is.
Okay.
Describes our tendency to make judgments
Mm-hmm.
based solely on the information that's readily available.
Okay.
Even if it's incomplete or biased,
Right.
we often fail to consider what we don't know,
Right. Right.
and this can lead to flawed conclusions.
So it's like judging a book by its cover. Or like forming an opinion about someone based on a brief encounter.
Exactly.
We create a narrative
Yeah.
based on very limited information,
Yeah,
often overlooking the gaps in our knowledge.
exactly. WYSIAD can contribute to overconfidence, snap judgments,
Right.
all sorts of errors in reasoning.
Okay.
So we need to remember there's always more to the story than what we initially see.
So how do we combat WYSIAD?
Yeah.
Do we need to become like super sleuths digging for every piece of information?
Well, you know, it's not always practical to gather every piece of information.
Right.
But we can be more mindful of our knowledge's limitations.
Okay.
Asking questions, seeking diverse perspectives,
Yeah.
considering alternative explanations
Okay.
can help us avoid these pitfalls.
So it's about acknowledging that our initial perception
Yeah.
might not be the full picture.
Exactly.
It's about challenging our own assumptions
Yeah,
and being open to new information.
precisely. And this leads us to another bias that's particularly relevant for anyone who's ever planned a project
Great.
or set a deadline.
Ooh, this one hits close to home.
Oh, yeah.
I'm terrible at estimating how long things will actually take.
All right, well, this is the planning fallacy.
Okay.
And it describes our tendency to underestimate the time,
Yeah.
the costs, and the risks of future projects,
Yeah.
often overestimating the benefits.
I know this all too well.
You do.
I always think I could accomplish twice as much as I realistically can in a day.
Oh, yeah.
And then I end up like stressed and behind schedule.
Oh, no.
Why do we do this to ourselves?
Part of it is our tendency to focus on the best case scenario,
Okay.
ignoring potential roadblocks.
Okay.
We also often forget to factor in past experiences.
Okay.
Remember the Sydney Opera House?
Oh, yeah. It was supposed to take a few years and cost something like $7 million, right?
Yeah, it ended up taking over a decade
Wow.
and costing over $100 million.
Oh, my God.
So that's a classic example of the planning fallacy in action.
Yeah.
And it's not just huge projects.
Okay.
We do this with everyday tasks as well.
So are there any strategies to avoid falling into this trap?
Yeah.
Any tips for us chronic underestimators?
Yeah, first try breaking down large projects
Okay.
into smaller, more manageable tasks.
Okay.
That helps create more realistic estimates.
Okay.
Second, reflect on past experiences
Right.
with similar projects.
Okay.
What went wrong?
Yeah.
What took longer than anticipated?
That's a good point. We often forget to learn from our past mistakes.
And finally,
Yeah.
get input from others
Yes.
who have relevant experience.
Okay.
They can offer valuable insights,
Right.
help identify potential pitfalls.
To be realistic.
Yeah.
Learn from past mistakes.
Yeah.
Get some outside perspective.
There you go.
Awesome. Good advice.
Now, it's important to remember that even being aware of these biases
Yeah.
doesn't make us immune to them.
Right.
Our brains are wired for efficiency,
Mm.
and these shortcuts are deeply ingrained.
Okay.
But by recognizing these patterns,
Yeah.
we can start to question our thinking,
Okay.
make more conscious choices.
This has been a mind-blowing journey through the world of cognitive biases.
It is fascinating, isn't it?
It's amazing how much these subtle quirks in our thinking
Yeah.
can influence our decisions.
It's true.
And Kahneman doesn't just leave us with the list of biases.
No, it doesn't.
He offers practical strategies
Yeah,
for thinking smarter and making better decisions.
he does.
Okay, let's talk solutions.
Right.
What are some takeaways from the book that our listeners can apply to their own lives?
One of the most crucial strategies is simply to slow down.
Okay.
Give System 2 a chance to catch those System 1 errors.
So before jumping into a big decision, especially financial ones,
Yeah.
take a pause.
Yeah,
Don't just go with your gut.
exactly.
Weigh your options, consider the risks and benefits.
Yeah.
Maybe even sleep on it.
Yeah, give yourself time to think things through.
What are some other ways we can avoid these thinking traps?
Another key strategy is to seek data whenever possible.
Okay.
Don't just rely on intuition or anecdotes.
Right.
Look for objective information to back up your decisions.
So do your research, check the statistics.
Yeah,
Don't let emotions cloud your judgment,
exactly.
especially in situations like hiring,
Yeah,
where first impressions and halo effects can easily sway us.
for sure.
And finally, Kahneman emphasizes the importance of thinking probabilistically.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So this means understanding that most things in life involve uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
We need to evaluate risks
Okay.
in terms of probabilities
Okay.
rather than seeking absolute certainty.
So don't expect to be right all the time.
Yeah,
Be prepared for unexpected outcomes.
exactly.
Maybe brush up on those statistics.
Exactly. Thinking probabilistically helps us make more informed decisions,
Okay.
especially in situations where there are no guarantees.
This is all incredibly valuable advice.
Yeah.
It's like Kahneman's given us a toolkit
Yeah,
for becoming better thinkers
Yeah.
and decision makers.
it is.
But as fascinating as this deep dive has been,
Yeah,
I feel like we've only scratched the surface of this book.
I agree.